Hello everyone, welcome to the Obstacle Races New Zealand podcast. So how have you been, Stephen?
Good then, Max. Finally out of lockdown, day 2. Been out for lunch, breakfast and dinner. 3 days. Getting out and about. No, not much else. Been doing a little bit of running. I signed up for the 12 days of Christmas, which is 78 kilometres in 12 days. So I've been running around one of my local parks, picking up a few kilometres there.
I signed up to that as well. I've been doing pretty poorly though. I haven't gone very far. So you're on track?
Yep. I started at 12Ks and of coming down, thinking that if I start at 1K one day and 2 the next, and 3 the next, and 4 the next, by the end of the week or middle of next, it finishes on Sunday, I'll have lost interest. So I started the other way, higher and getting smaller. So I've only got, I think, 6Ks tomorrow, and then it just sort of goes downhill from there. So it's a lot easier to get out of bed.
Oh, nice. That's how they calculated the 78, wasn't it? It was
but also
each day goes up to 78 over 12 days. I signed up to that as well. I'm not really on track to complete it, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
And the other
I
thing
might need to add on an extra
I signed up.
week.
I'm doing the GOAT, which is the Mount Ruapehu trail run in early January. So I'm just trying to get a few kilometres in because I'll have a long taper over the Christmas break, I think, and do very little. So this week we're having a chat with Scotty Thornton, potentially one of New Zealand's better or best or OCR champions, I suppose, runners.
I put up a post on Facebook about upcoming guests on the podcast and a little bit of brief, one sentence about who they are, and I described Scotty Thornton as New Zealand's greatest obstacle racer. And when I wrote it, I put a question mark after it. And right as I posted it, I'm like, I'll just delete that. So I posted it as New Zealand's greatest obstacle racer. And I think someone else who had been trying to get on the podcast commented on that and pointed out the title. I'm like, I think the title might have to made
some comments on it.
Yeah. But it could be true. I mean, there's a question mark, but it could very well be true. Just hearing about what he's done and his exploits and his racing around the world and just achieving high results around the world.
Achieving high results, yeah. And I put him into a couple of search play engines like Yancey.com, YanceyCamp.com, which is the Spartan races. He comes up, he's well ranked there. He's done really well on that. And then Tough Mudder, he's the only Kiwi that I know that's podiumed or been up there right at the end of that. So, and then he went to Iceland and represented New Zealand there.
But yeah, that's crazy hearing about the experiences there. Awesome experiences, but
he certainly has. Tells a good story. And talking to a couple of his friends, they told me that he was super nervous coming on, and he didn't have anything to say because his life had been so uninteresting. And I think it was one of the better podcasts we've had. He was very interesting when we got him talking.
Totally, yeah. It was very good. We had throughout the interview, we have a list of his races, his obstacle races.
Yes, yep.
So asking him about his races, and that was really cool to just draw out his experiences and hearing his story about, I can't remember what it was, a marathon. He ran a marathon.
The Hawke's Bay Marathon. That's how he got flights to get to Iceland. We won't spoil it and tell you how that happened, but that was funny. Yes,
it's a good part to listen to. Yeah,
he has got some good stories. All right. Well, we'll finish up here. Next week we'll have a bit of a rundown on Alpha Challenge. You're off to run in that?
Yeah, this weekend. So next podcast we'll talk about it, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
And we'll have a little bit of a delve into the Spartan World Championships in Abu Dhabi. That looked interesting. the little bits I've seen on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, if people haven't listened to our last podcast yet with Jeremy Robinson, he's a Kiwi based over in the Middle East, and we talk about Spartan World Championships. Yeah, if people want to go back and listen to that, it's worth a listen.
Yeah, he was another interesting person. All right, without further ado, we will cut over to Scotty Thornton.
Joining us today, we've got Scotty Thornton. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, we're doing good. Yeah, we were just talking before we start recording, actually, that just saying we asked you to send through a list of the events you've entered, and yeah, it's mind-blowing. You've got some phenomenal results, like top 10 results and top 3 results, and some really big OCR events. Yeah, I mean, is OCR your main sport, or do you do other races and other endurance events as well?
I haven't actually done an OCR race in probably close to 3 years now. I just, I mean, we haven't been able to for 2 years with the way the world is, but I did a lot of them in like a 3-year span from about 2016 to the end of 2018, and was then looking to kind of branch out and try something else before going back to it, but definitely want to go back to it, just haven't really had the chance yet. But yeah, it was only about 3 years that I did it. I just kind of chucked everything at it for that amount of time.
Okay, so what were you doing before OCR?
I played a lot of like team sports at school. Like I did, cricket, rugby, hockey, squash, kind of things like that, and did most of that through uni as well. But then I started training for a marathon at the end of uni, and I got a knee injury, and so I couldn't run for about 2 years. So I started taking up triathlons, so just doing the swimming and the cycling part of it. And then in 2015, I had a few mates that were living in Aussie after university, and they'd signed up for just a standard Tough Mudder, and we kind of organised a bit of a lads trip to go over and catch up and do that as part of it, and that was kind of how it started, and did 2 or 3 of those with them over in Sydney and Brisbane over the span of the year, and always thought they were really fun, and I kind of found them a bit easy because my mates weren't that fit, so they were more interested in the drinking part afterwards. So I started looking into more, bigger and competitive races, and then just got really lucky that my flatmate at the time played rugby with Matt Ainsley and told me that he'd been over at this crazy thing in the desert called World's Toughest Mudder, and then I got introduced to him, and then it all kind of kicked off after that.
He led you down the wrong path or the right path, one or the other.
Yeah, he was always joking that if I ever made it, he had to get rights for finding me and being my first coach.
Well, before we dive too deep into that, so you're a Kiwi boy, born and bred where?
Northland. My parents have a dairy farm between Whangarei and Dargaville, so grew up there on the farm, and came to Auckland for boarding school, then went down to Dunedin for uni, and then back to Auckland now for the last 7 or 8 years. Okay.
You said you played a lot of team sports and that because of your knee injury. Then, so you've got your knee sorted. I know just before we come on here, you said you suffered with a knee injury again, or just had a cortisone shot. But
yeah,
you still got
had the cortisone injection yesterday, so I have to wait and see how that goes. But I've kind of had lots of ongoing injuries for years, but the knee's the issue at the moment. But I think it'll be fine. I just kind of taking a year off at the moment to let the body recover before I bash it up a bit more. But yeah, I've kind of done everything. I've pretty much done everything. Done ankles, knees, back, shoulders. Yeah, kind of most of the way up.
You're knocking up a few Ks on your push bike, I see on Strava.
Yeah. That's kind of been my go-to to give my knee a break, especially with lockdown, with all the streets being a bit emptier. You can just take over the road and go where you want. So I've been kind of doing about 150k a week, just kicking around on that.
So, and then you got into OCR, like you said, you went to Oz and did a few races.
Yeah.
And according to your list, you did the Spartan Ultra in 2016, which you got second place in.
Yeah, so that was my first competitive race in like September 2016. So I met Matt Ainsley at the Xterra Trail Series that year, like a few months earlier, and he introduced me to Liam and Abe Dyer and kind of the rest of that group of people, and they had all booked to go over and do this race. So I was just kind of the tag along and joined their group and didn't know any of them really, and just followed them over. And I was kind of felt like I was completely out of my depth and didn't really know what I was doing. And then Abe and Liam said to me at the start of the race that they were expecting me to get top 10, and and I didn't believe them at all, because you're kind of looking around at all these athletic, intimidating people on the start line. You're thinking, I can't compete with these guys. And it was quite funny. I still remember it being nervous and not really knowing how, because it's a long race. It's a marathon with 60 plus obstacles in it, so you can't exactly go out of the gates firing. But it was about 5k into it, and I was running with Liam and Abe, and they basically turned to me and said, "What the hell are you still doing here? You should be miles in front of us. Don't worry about us. Just go and have fun." So I took off after that, and I didn't see them again. And I had no idea what position I was in for the entire race, because they had the Ultra started first, but they had a Beast, a Super, and a Sprint all running at the same time on various parts of the course. And the only way you could tell who you were actually competing against was the little coloured wristband. But after 42 Ks, our one was grey, so they all kind of come out brown or just muddy. And so I crossed the finish line not knowing, not even thinking I'd done that good, because I didn't know what to expect. And I asked the person, I guess, like, what position I was, and they asked me how many laps I did, and I said 2, and they were like, "Oh, I don't actually know if anyone's finished that yet." And I went over to the timing tent, and someone had finished about 2 minutes before me, and he was the guy that beat me. But the annoying thing I found out later was that I failed the last obstacle before the finish line, which was the spear throw. But I was so tired, it took me about 5 minutes to do the burpees. So I was actually winning the race and had no idea. And then got over to he got his spear and overtook me and won.
Oh
wow!
How do you find those the ultras and that do that when you go with all the other people? Because I've spoken to a few people and they say you run along and then you've got to keep an eye on, not follow the person in front of you, know where you're going, because the sprint will go off to the left and then the super takes off to the right somewhere else. You've got to keep going. Have you had any where you've turned the wrong way and missed obstacles? Or
I had one. They kind of do it better now, and they usually have Beast and Ultra Beast on the same day, and they have a sprint and super on a separate day. But that was just a 1 day thing, so they had everything going at once. And now they have the Ultra people wear like a kind of like a purple singlet kind of thing that shows, so you can see the distinction between the who's racing what. But there was a race I did in Bright in 2017, and it was the super, so it was supposed to be, they'd marked it as being about 13 or 14k, and me and a guy were basically overtaking each other the whole time. Just whatever strength obstacle you were, we just kept on going past each other, and we got to the end at about 10k, and just before we were about to do the last obstacle, I think we we're probably coming about 5th or 6th at this point, and the marshal kind of went, "You guys are here too early, you've obviously missed something." And we went, "No, we haven't. Look, there's 20, 30 people behind us, everyone's done the same thing." And what had happened is, there was, at about the 8k mark, there was supposed to be what we thought was a river crossing, because you went down to the river and there was an arrow on the other side, but everyone crossed the river, but the first 2 people who were winning and coming second, they knew the course and they went down to the river and then ran along the bank, and that was supposed to take you to this other part of the course, and there was like an extra 5 or 6k of like 10 more obstacles and going up a giant hill and doing a sandbag carry and then coming back down the other side of the river. We just missed that, and we just did the back half of the course, and then everyone except for these first two people got told they had to go out and do the extra 6K that they'd missed. So there was literally only two people in the entire course that did it right, and everyone else
Had to redo it.
We were lining up for a trifecta, so everyone was trying to take the 14K race and the 6K sprint that was after that a bit easy. We ended up doing 20K straight off the bat because everyone went the wrong way.
God, it would have been a mess in timing and all that too.
Oh yeah, it was. It looked ridiculous at the end of the day when they did at the award ceremony, and they give the first place, second place, and third place, and there was about half an hour's difference between second and third in the timing, just because the first two knew what they were doing and just left everyone behind.
So where else? What else we got? We've got Whistler. You've been to Whistler a couple of times. They were with. Oh no, that's Whistler's not the one out of Vegas, though, is it? No, that's in Utah.
No. Yeah. So the first year we went to Vegas to do the world's toughest, it was basically the same people went back the next year to Whistler, because that's when Tough Mudder brought in their kind of holy grail side of things, where they had their the tougher race, which is like the standard course they do, but timed with positions, and then the toughest, which was the 8-hour version. And so that was the first year they brought that in, and you had to do an 8-hour one to qualify as a contender for the world's toughest. So we all lined up the Whistler one because it was the only one not in America, so it was somewhere different, and we went over, and there was 7 or 8 of us, and we hired a house on the ski slope for a few days and went up there, and the race itself was on the Whistler Olympic Park, so where they had the Winter Olympics, like I don't know how long ago, a few years ago.
Yep.
And so part of the course was like running up and down the ski slopes and all those crazy long jumps and things they have, and that was one of the most insane races we'd done, because the time of year it was in Canada was like the bears were all, I can't remember if it was getting ready for hibernation or coming out of hibernation, but there were bears around anyway. So everyone had to run with a whistle on them in case they saw one, and then they had people with dogs kind of patrolling through the forest all night trying to keep the bears away. And there was at the end of the race there was a few that, because the race started at midnight and went to 8 in the morning, that was just to add a bit more to it. So it was pitch black, and you're just running through the bush and hoping that the sound you can hear is someone else you're competing against and not a bear.
Not a bear following you.
Wow.
There was a few people towards the end of the race that ran up the top of one of the ski slopes and saw a few little bear cubs roaming around and blew their whistle when they ran off and quickly sprinted away.
It's always something that makes me grateful to live in New Zealand. Like you can go running in the bush and not need to worry about any sort of dangerous animal, or not too much, trying to kill you.
You're not thinking about some mountain lion or something jumping out and trying to chase you. It's like a tui or a possum at worst.
Yeah. Have you ever had any experiences competing overseas, like running into, wildlife and just out especially doing ultra runs? Like you go so far out as well, like, away from people that.
I at the start of this year I did because I was training for the Tarawera 100 mile ultra, and I was doing a training run near my parents' farm, so just kind of running around the gravel roads up there because it's in the middle of nowhere, so it's basically the roads are like running on trails. And I went off-road to do a 10 or so K section in the bush, and about a K into it I ran into a wild boar on the track.
Oh, that'd be the thing in New Zealand to worry about, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I did not expect that at all, and we both kind of stopped and looked at each other, and thankfully it was actually pretty small, so it got scared of me and ran off. But it did worry me that it was so small that mum or dad might be close by, so I ended up getting my phone out of my pocket and blasting some music to kind of warn everyone that I was coming, just I didn't want to run into another one, because at that point I was about 40 or 50k into the run, so I wasn't in the position to outrun it if I had to.
No,
that's probably the only time I've ever come across something I've seen a few possums and stuff at night when you're doing it, and during the Tarawera race itself, I actually saw a wallaby, but that's not exactly scary. It's just kind of a little thing on the trail. Definitely no bears or lions or anything like that's overseas. No snakes in Aussie or anything like that.
Yeah, we'll have to come back and ask you about the Tarawera Ultra. Yeah, if you want to ask more about OCR for the meantime, Stephen.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, so you did Whistler a couple of times by the looks.
Yeah, both those races were on the same day. So the tougher was in the morning and the toughest was at night.
So how long's the tougher?
18, 20k.
So you did 20k in the morning, you did 30 miles that night.
Yep. So yeah, went actually I went to go home and have a sleep, but you're kind of too amped up, so just ended up staying up till midnight and doing the race and then crashing for about a day afterwards. But yeah, the two races on the same day.
And then you went back again to Canada the next year for the OCRWC after doing the Bright weekend.
Yeah, so
would have been lovely being on the plane after doing a trifecta.
Yeah, so it was. I was actually quite lucky. I wasn't planning on doing Bright at all, but the tougher that I did in Whistler was me and Matt were the only ones that did it, and we just wanted to do it because then we got that Tough Mudder Holy Grail. That was the only way we could kind of tick that off. But because the 8-hour toughest was that night, all the serious people were doing that, and so we turned up to the Whistler one and weren't going to take it seriously, and then noticed that there wasn't really that many people and none of them looked that fit. So Matt kind of leaned over and said to me before we started, he's like, bro, there's prize money for this. You should have a go at it. And so after a few K, I kind of realized I was at the front and had a bit of a go at it and ended up winning it and won $500. And I was like, and then I figured it out, and that covered my flights and my entry fee for Bright. So I just added that on to the start of it. So it was never part of the plan. It just kind of worked out. But yeah, so had the Bright trifecta in October, and then the day after that went back to Melbourne and flew to Toronto and had about 2 days there, and then made my way kind of 2 hours north to what's called the Blue Mountains, which is where the World Champs was. And that was again just a ski field, but they'd converted it to a OCR race and just made everyone run up and down the ski slopes the whole time, which was just mud by the end of it because there was thousands of people there.
So you did the 3K and the 15K pro division in there, and then you also did the relay team with a couple of other guys.
Yeah. So do you know how the OCR World Champs how they run it? Because it's quite different to Spartan and Tough Mudder and
a little bit. Yeah, I've never done it, but familiar. But yeah, explain it. So people listening might be familiar.
They usually run it over 3 days, and they have a 3K course. The next day is a 15, and then the next day they have a team relay, which is kind of about 8K, and they split that up into 3 sections. So it's 4 sections. So you have a speed section, a strength section, and a technical section, and then a teamwork section for the last kind of 2 or 3 obstacles, which is usually just a giant wall that you have to get on each other's shoulders and lift each other over. And so yeah, the 3K on the first day, they have it. There's so many different categories because they have male and female pros, and then they have age group basically split into five age brackets. So like 20 to 25, 25 to 30, and they go up to like 60, 65. So there's lots of different fields. But everyone starts off with a wristband, and it's not like Spartan or anything that there's penalties if you fail an obstacle. You can have as many attempts at an obstacle as you want, but you have to pass it to go through. And if you can't pass it, they literally come along with a pair of scissors and cut your wristband off. And you can keep doing the rest of the course, but anyone that beats you who finishes with a wristband is automatically in front of you. So if you finish but your wristband got cut off because you failed an obstacle, you're kind of like, they still give you the medal and your finishing stuff, but you're kind of classed as incomplete. So it's only the people who keep the wristband, who complete every single obstacle in the course, that kind of count as the technical finishes.
And
so
you can't get that wristband back by doing a penalty loop or anything like that.
No.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
You can try an obstacle. You can spend 2 hours at an obstacle and try it 50 times, but as soon as you tell the marshal that you give up, they come along with a pair of scissors and cut it off, and that's it. So for most people, the goal is not the time or the place. It's just to finish with the band. The band's more important to most people than the medal, because that's your proof that you completed everything.
100%.
It's a cool system.
Yeah. It works really well. And yeah, because you can, it's not like Spartan where you get like one shot at the spear throw or something, and then if you miss it, that's it. It's yeah, I was staying with someone who was a marshal at one of the obstacles, and he said there were people that literally spend hours at things, and sometimes they'll have 5 or 6 goes at it, and they'll stop and they'll sit down for 10 minutes and they'll shake their arms out and they'll get their breath back, and then they'll go again, and they'll watch other people do it and learn some techniques. And
it must cause awful bottlenecks though if you
at most of the obstacles they have I guess they have what they call like a retry lane. So it's these lanes are for people who are just getting here and it's their first attempt, so they can go straight through. And if you've failed, you have to go to the far end of the obstacle and use these ones. So you're only holding other people up who have failed.
Okay. Yep.
But yeah, so the one that year in Canada, that was because they bring obstacles from all the different races around the world. So it's like they have kind of like sponsored obstacles. So there'd be this one from this specific race in England, and then this race from France will have its obstacle, and sometimes you'll get like a company will sponsor one. So you'll get it was like a brand called Force 5 who like created heaps of weird little hook and ball holds. So they would make a rig out of just random things like that. And they have a lot of multi rigs. So there'll be like a rope and then a ring and then a little bar and then something else to balance on. And every day they would, so for the 3K course, they'd have that rig set up in one way, and you'd learn it and be like, cool, yep, I did that, I remember what to do. The next day you'd get there and they'd switch all the things around.
No, that's cool.
So they constantly changed it.
Screwing with you.
Yep.
And I see you did both, got 100%, and you got 100% for your, so you got your 3 bands and brought them home.
Yep. Kept all my bands. That was the main goal. So I was pretty happy with that.
And then just for a little bit of fun, you did a charity run after.
Yeah, they put it on every year because the course is set up. They open it up to the volunteers and the marshals to run the course, who have been like kind of looking after it for the week. But you can pay an extra, I think it was like $50 or $60, and go run it again, and you get another medal and all that sort of stuff. But because the course is already set up and everyone's just doing it for fun, they pick a charity and all the money goes to that. So it was quite a cool thing they do every year.
Sounds real good. Sounds like you had a fun time there, actually.
Yeah, it was. The whole trip was kind of crazy because I thought I was just going over by myself, but when I did that race in Whistler, because we said we started the race at midnight. After about an hour, I was running with a girl, and her head torch just stopped working. Her batteries ran flat, so I ran with her for the next kind of hour and helped her through the course. Had no idea who she was, and she didn't know who I was, but she ended up coming second. And reached out to me the next day saying, thanks so much. I wouldn't have been able to get on the podium if it wasn't for you. And so I kept in contact with her, and her and a few of her other good Canadian friends were all going over to the World Champs. So they hired a house, and I went and stayed with, I think, 15 Canadians in a random house that I'd never really met before. And they were great. They were the most welcoming people, and a lot of them were really good as well. Some of them ended up winning their age groups, and one of the girls came second, I think, in the pro category, and they were all, that was cool. And then I'd kind of networked myself into meeting all these kind of professionals overseas just by chance. So that was cool.
Yep. Okay. So October, that's the beginning of summer, isn't it? Winter for them, isn't it? So it would have been starting to.
It was kind of autumnish. It was It was cooling off a bit, but it wasn't too
snow
bad.
around or anything.
No, there was no snow.
Yes, like we talk about a bit later on. So then you went to the world's toughest Mudder again, which was 80 miles. Oh God.
Yeah.
So where was that one? That in 2017.
That was in Vegas again, exact same place.
Oh, so all the world's toughest have been in Vegas, were they?
They did 4 there in a row.
Yep.
So I think I did the last 2 there. I think 2014, 15, 16, and 17 were there.
Yep.
But I did 16 and 17, and then after that they moved it to Atlanta, I think. But yeah, I didn't do those ones.
Okay. But 80 miles is a fair old way too.
Yeah, that was kind of the goal, because with World's Toughest they have you get the 24-hour headband for still being on the course at 24 hours, which is basically everyone's goal. But then they have you have a race bib with your number on it, and if you get to 50 miles, so 10 laps, you get a bronze one, and if you get to 75 miles, you get a silver one, and then if you get to 100, you get an orange one, which is kind of like a handful of people ever have done it kind of thing. But yeah, so the year before I got 70, so I was one off getting that silver one. So my goal was I didn't want to go back and just get it. I wanted to basically do a victory lap in the silver one. So 80 was the goal, so I could get the silver one and then kind of take my time and show it off on course and get myself a photo crossing the line with the silver one. So that whole race was kind of ended up being perfect.
Yeah, 12th overall. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah. The girl I met in Whistler, she came third woman, but she was 13th overall, so she was just a few minutes behind me.
Behind you.
So that was quite cool. We crossed, overtook each other a few times on course and kept each other company a bit.
And then the next couple you've got here were the Brisbane Spartan Ultra and toughest Mudder in Brisbane.
Yeah. So that was I actually I feel like I kind of go through the same cycle every year, which I do these big races at the end of a year and then get injured for a few months and then kind of come back in April or May and start again. But that's basically what had happened there, that I'd done the World's Toughest in 2017 and spent a day running around the desert doing all these crazy obstacles and didn't get injured, and then came back to Auckland and went for a casual run around the footpath and tripped and split my knee open and ended up with a few stitches in it and couldn't run for the next 2 months. That was a bit annoying. But the Brisbane Ultra was my kind of next thing after taking a few months to recovery and building things back up. But by then I was already eyeing up the Iceland race, so I knew that for that Brisbane one I just needed to finish the Ultra to qualify for it. So I wasn't too worried about placings or anything. So I just cruised through that a little bit. I didn't go out to try and win it or place it, but I still ended up doing better than I thought.
4th, that's pretty good.
They changed that one quite a bit, and because it was at the exact same place that I did my first one 2 years earlier and got second. So I was like, cool, I think I remember most of the course. But in the middle, they made us do probably still one of the hardest things I've ever done in an obstacle course race, which they gave us a sandbag and they made us run around like a kilometer track that had like a few nets and walls on it, and we had to take the bag with us the whole way. But the last 400 meters of it was you'd hold the sandbag, do a burpee, stand up, and then jump, and then go down and do another burpee, and you just had to do that for the whole way. And there were a lot of people.
Broad jumps.
There were a lot of people that didn't start the second lap, and they just gave up after that.
400 meters of the sandbag, jeez. I've done like 100 meters burpee.
It was
brutal.
It took like half an hour to do this like like less than a kilometre. And then we spent the next lap of the course, the next 21k, thinking I've got to save some energy because that's how we finish the race. And then we got to the end, and they told us that they'd canned that for the second lap because too many people were going to be disqualified for being timed out. So we'd saved all this energy, got to the end, and then we just got to walk over the line.
Ugh.
Yeah, that was brutal. That was very hard.
And so was the toughest Mudder on at the same time, or did you have to go back? Was that later in the year?
It was about 3 weeks later.
Oh, okay.
So I think I did the Spartan race, came back to Auckland, had a week off. The next week I went to Napier and did the Hawke's Bay Marathon, and then the weekend after that I flew to I think I was only in Aussie for about 30 hours and I didn't sleep. So I flew in the Saturday morning, went and caught up with Matt Ainsley and kind of sat on his couch for the afternoon, and then the race started at midnight again because it was that kind of format. So did the race, went back to the city, had a shower at his hotel again, and then jumped on a plane and went home.
It's dedication for you.
It still didn't have a reasonably fresh out of uni and didn't have a lot of money, so you're like, oh, I don't want to spend money for a hotel when I'm not even going to stay in it. So I just thought I'd save myself the $200 and fly home.
Comes through home, yeah. Well,
yeah.
It's only a short flight too, so I suppose not so bad.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Oh, the next one you've got is you're back at the OCR Worlds again in England this time.
Yep. So that was a lot different to the year before in Canada. Canada was very hilly, and it was a lot more like a mountain run with obstacles thrown in between it. And that year in England, they same format. So we had the first day was 3k, the next day was the 15, and then the team and charity one on the last day. The 3k was pretty standard compared to the year before, but the 15k, they'd put 100 obstacles in it.
I was going to say, you've got 100 obstacles on 15 kilometres. It would have been pretty much obstacle to obstacle.
Yeah, it was. There were very few stretches where you'd kind of actually get a rhythm of running. It was kind of every 200 or 300 meters you were doing something, but it was, a lot of them weren't like big rig type things. They had a lot of that near the end, but some of them would just be like hurdles or little walls or cargo nets or balance beam type things. There weren't a lot of things that massively taxed you, especially in a row, but it was just a lot to get through. There were people who were definitely runners on the course, and by the back end you were just overtaking them because they would try and sprint between obstacles to catch up, and then they'd burn themselves out. It was a lot more tactical. You couldn't just kind of get in a rhythm and stretch your forearms out between obstacles because you're always going straight from one thing to another. And
looking at the photos that Hayden Wells brought back, it looked like it was pretty wet and miserable too.
He went the year after me.
So he go 19, did he?
Yeah.
Sorry,
so I got really lucky, and it was, even the English people over there said it was like a weirdly long, hot summer for them, and we basically had blue skies and no cloud the entire weekend.
Ah, okay.
So we got really lucky. There's no way most people would have finished that course with that density of obstacles if it was wet. It was just too taxing.
Okay. Yeah.
I think they still. I should have looked up the numbers. They do have them, but it's roughly about a 60% overall that complete with the bands.
Yep.
And then it obviously changes with like age groups and things like that, but overall it's around that 60-70% of people that actually complete it all.
That's still pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it's supposed to be a world champ event, so everyone there's trained there and placed or done reasonably well in some other race to get there.
So the next one's the Spartan World Ultra in Iceland, but before we get there, we've been told to quiz you on the Hawke's Bay Marathon. and how you got to the World Championships.
Who told you that?
Oh, well, I'll let you work that out.
Yep, I'll hit Liam up about that later.
No, it wasn't him.
Was it Matt?
Matt.
Huh.
Don't forget, before you go to Iceland, ask him about the Hawke's Bay Marathon and how he got to.
So, whatever. Oh, it must have been like end of March or so. That year was Easter, and I went down to Queenstown to see a friend from uni. And on the way back from the flight with Air New Zealand, I was reading their magazine, and they had a little promo competition in there saying that because Air New Zealand sponsored the Hawke's Bay Marathon, that if you could, the competition was if you could run the marathon with a suitcase, tell us how you would do it and how long you reckon it would take you. So I just said, I'd just tie some string around it and wear it like a backpack and run. And didn't think anything of it. And then the week before the race, I got a call from someone at Air New Zealand saying, how's the marathon training going? And I was like, oh, it's going pretty good. I actually did one last weekend at the Spartan race overseas. And they said they'd Googled me and found my like Tough Mudder results and some other things. And they said they wanted to pick someone who they thought would actually finish the race. So they gave me a free entry to the marathon, and I had to turn up the day before and get presented with some Air New Zealand host people came dressed up in their uniforms and gave me a carry-on size suitcase that they'd put some backpack straps on and put an airplane seatbelt on and things like that. And the suitcase had a lock combination on the side of it. And they said, there's something inside for you. If you get to the end, we'll give you the combination once you cross the finish line. And so the only rule was that I wasn't allowed to wheel the suitcase on the course because it was a hazard for other people. But I had to take it off in the last 100 meters and wheel it across the line because they wanted that photo. So I wheeled it across the line. I was actually doing reasonably well until about the 30k mark. But it's all the straps started to loose and the bag became really, started hanging really low. So I had to keep stopping and adjusting everything. But I think I still did the marathon in roughly 3.5 hours. And yeah, got to the end and crossed the line, and they had all the support staff and someone dressed up in a captain's uniform and everything there. And they gave me the combination and I opened it, and it was flights for two anywhere in the world.
Well, there you go.
So me and my partner at the time, we planned a holiday to Iceland and got there for free, basically.
So you got a marathon for free?
Yeah.
Did you keep the carry-on bag as well?
Yeah, I've still got it. It's up behind me. It doesn't get used for anything, but it's but yeah, it's a cool little souvenir to have, I guess.
It's a neat little story as well.
Yeah, that was funny. It was people's reactions on course were hilarious because, for one, they didn't expect someone to be running with it. They told me I could take all day and I didn't even have to carry it myself the whole way as long as I carried it at the start line and at the finish line. And I was like, oh nah, I want to do it properly. So at one point I was looking like I was on track to do kind of like a 3:15 marathon and finish in the top 20. And they thought there was a bit of a joke and that I'd somehow tricked the system and I'd got someone to I don't know, put it in a car and drop it off for me somewhere. Or and everyone I was running towards, it just kind of looks like you're wearing a hydration pack because all they see is the shoulder straps. And then you get beside them and there's this giant suitcase sticking out the back of you, and they didn't really know what was happening. It got a few laughs and comments on course.
And then you took off to Iceland.
Yeah, that was. I mean, Iceland itself is just an awesome place. I'd recommend it anytime to anywhere for a holiday. It's just amazing. But the conditions for a race, it was easily the most brutal thing I've done. So it was December in Iceland, so it's obviously just insanely cold. But there's also about 3.5 hours of daylight. a day. So the race, we got there a week before the race to kind of acclimatise to conditions and do a bit of a sightseeing trip and do all that, which I'm so glad we did, because I took all my like thermals and they had this giant list of mandatory gear you had to have for health and safety reasons. But I realised within the first 2 days being there that most of my stuff wasn't kind of, my jacket and everything was up to scratch, but like my gloves and all that were just like, my hands were just going to freeze. So I had to go and buy some like some fully waterproof, windproof, keep you warm to minus 20 degrees kind of gloves, and kind of upskill my gear and spend a few.
Country for that, anyway. They would have had.
Yeah, they had
easier to buy than around the shops of Auckland.
Yeah, they had shops everywhere, so it was a bit more expensive, but like I wouldn't have been able to do the race without it. But then I had to go out and find a few ways to test it before the race. I didn't want to be using it beforehand, for the first time, kind of in the middle of a world champ race. So I found a few kind of local playgrounds, and the first few days we had there were pretty good weather, and then it snowed really heavily overnight one day, and we got stuck in the main city for about 3 days because we couldn't use the roads. So we just kind of walked around for a bit and got used to the snow and found a few playgrounds and tested gloves and stuff out on random little monkey bars and things like that.
So just for people who don't know, do you want to give a rundown what the Ultra World Championships is, like how it works?
Yeah. So they haven't been doing it for that long. I think the year I did it was maybe the second year they'd done it. But it's to qualify for it, you have to finish a Spartan Ultra race, which is any one of their standard races that's roughly 50 Ks and has 60 plus obstacles depending on which course you do. But you have to finish one of those to qualify. So I did that one in Brisbane earlier in the year, and that got me there. And then this race was in, I don't know how to pronounce the place, but some crazy long name in Iceland, just out of the main city of Reykjavik. And there were 30 odd countries and a few hundred people being represented there, and we all turned up to this basically indoor soccer stadium that was all artificial grassed, and that was kind of our base for the race. And so the race is about a 10 or 11 kilometer loop, so kind of like a standard Spartan super course, I guess. And the race starts at midday, and you've got 24 hours to do as many laps of the course as you can. But what was different about that compared to the world's toughest mudder is, with world's toughest, they give you 24 hours, but they give you a kind of hour and a half grace period afterwards, that if you're already on a lap, you've got this time to finish the lap. You just can't start a new one. With Spartan, they had an actual designated finish line. So every time you finished a lap, you chose to either go back into the tent to prepare yourself for another lap, or you crossed the finish line. And once you crossed the finish line, you were done. And if you were still on course at 24 hours, you were disqualified. So you had to
work it out.
You had to work it out, because I ended up finishing the race in 21 hours, and my last lap that I did took me just under 3 hours. So I would have had to do my next lap just a few minutes quicker than that one to get back in time, and it wasn't worth the risk of if something goes wrong and I fail things, or I get injured, or I just completely run out of energy, I might cross after the 24-hour mark and be disqualified. So it wasn't, you were kind of weighing up things like that the whole time, trying to figure out tactics and whether you're going to be able to make it back.
How do they do obstacles? Do they have the 30 burpee penalty, Spartan style?
They did, but they did again, they did it differently. So for they had 3 different categories. They had elite, age group, and then open. Everyone in open did their burpees at the obstacle they failed them at, just because there was no prize money or placings. It was just kind of people to fill in the gaps. But everyone else you would carry around a white piece of card with you, and that was your responsibility, and you got a new one each lap. And there there were 3 different types of obstacles on the course. There were the kind of things like cargo nets and walls and barbed wire that were just mandatory completion. Had to complete it. You can't go any further in the race if you don't get past this kind of thing. And then there were a few penalty obstacles like rope climbs and like sandbags and buckets and all that sort of stuff that if you didn't think you could finish or you couldn't climb the rope, you'd make you do a penalty loop or make you do something else. And then they had 6 burpee obstacles per lap. So they were the Olympus, Tyrolean Traverse, multi-rig, spear throw, twister, and Hercules hoist. And each one of those obstacles had a marshal at it with a different hole punch. So someone would have a star, someone would have a circle, a square, and then you had to, at the end of every lap, you would come back and give your card to a marshal, and they would go, okay, you've got 3 holes in it, so it means you failed 3 obstacles. You now have to do 3 times 30 burpees, do all of your 90 burpees now.
Oh, wow.
And so they did that so they could have all these cameras set up and film everyone doing them, because they had quite harsh penalties for anyone who was caught doing less burpees than what they were supposed to. So yeah, that I got lucky and that kind of worked in my favor because I didn't fail a lot of things. But I had a friend who failed 4 obstacles on the first lap, so had to do 120 burpees straight away before he could continue on to the start of the second lap. And then at midnight, they dropped the penalty from 30 down to 15 per fail, just to make it a bit more manageable.
So they'd still have some people running in the morning.
Yeah, but they was also it was your card was your responsibility. So if you finished all the obstacles but somehow lost the piece of paper on your way back, you had no proof. So it was, you were constantly like every few minutes just kind of tapping your jacket being like, yep, my card's still there. I haven't like gone back to put it back in my pocket and it's fallen out. Or so that was, yeah, it was just a whole nother element to think about the whole time, that you've got this precious little piece of card, which is like the difference between how much energy you're going to use at the end if you've passed everything or not.
So did they have water obstacles? Because you look wet in some of your photos. Or is that just the snow melting from?
It would have been the snow.
Okay.
So I tried to find a good photo of the course, but it was, or at least find one that showed the difference between the base where we were and then the hill that we went up. But the course itself was kind of, the first K or so was reasonably flat and had like a few tire pull obstacles and a few walls and hurdles and stuff. And then you basically didn't have an obstacle for about 2K, and you just went straight up the side of this cliff, which was they had a whole bunch of waratahs and ropes, and you were just pulling yourself up on ropes because it was just rocks and snow, and it was just crazy to be trying to race up it. And then you'd get to the top of this thing, and it would just, the first lap, because no one's been up there, it was close to knee deep snow, and everyone's just running through it. And after a few laps, it's been compacted, and there was a pretty distinct track that everyone was following. And then you'd get to the other side, and you'd have to come down this ridiculously steep, slippery section. And it was about halfway through the race where they basically had an ambulance parked at the bottom of the hill because so many people were falling and just slipping and injuring themselves. They had to, halfway through the race, had to send a bunch of marshals up with extra waratahs and rope and create a few more places for people to hold on to things, because everyone was just, once you'd taken the first layer of dirt off, it was just ice underneath, and no one could stay on their feet. And then in the last maybe 3 or 4 hours of the race, they let us put crampons on, so we could put those little spikes on our shoes for the snow section. You had to put them on at the bottom of the hill and take them back off when you got back to the bottom. But for the whole race, we were carrying them around, just waiting for them to let us use them. But they said we couldn't until right at the end, when too many people were getting injured.
Yeah. So you got, looking at your results, you got 10th overall and 8th male.
Yeah. That was
the first person for the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, that was never part of the plan at all. My goal was to get 50 miles, which I did. But yeah, I didn't even think about placings at all because there were quite a lot of big names at that event. There was Ryan Atkins and John Albin and
I was going to say, is that the one where they went for their $1 million? That's
the one that if someone did 100 miles, they got Joe DeSena, who's the owner of Spartan, was going to give them $1 million because he didn't think it was possible, and he was right. I think Ryan Atkins got the closest, and he got 83, and he was broken after that. But yeah, I did 55, I think, which was about 95k. So
I was going to say, you got 95k on the email you sent me.
Yeah,
which is a long way.
Yeah, especially in the snow and in about minus 12 degrees and everything, and the dark. It was 17 hours of that was in the dark.
Yeah, I looked at that and I thought, oh, December, that's a nice time of the year, but I forgot that's the northern hemisphere, so it's the opposite to here.
Yeah, it was snow, and it was you're talking minus 10 to minus 15, and then the wind picks up, and it's daylight from sunrise is at about 11:30 or 12, and then by 3 o'clock it's gone again. It's crazy. It's messes with you completely with jet lag. You just got no idea what time it is, what's happening.
But it would have been a good experience. You plan on going back?
Oh, I'd love to go back. I don't know if I would go back for a race again. I think the way that broke me, I don't know if I could handle it now that I've had even more injuries, but I'd definitely go back to visit the place, and I definitely want to do more ultras. I'm just not sure if I'd put myself through something that brutal again. That was hard on just every level, even just the because have you guys done Spartan races or?
Yep.
Yeah, so when you do the sandbag carries, they were just rocks. They were just solid. They were just frozen.
Frozen.
And just things like that just made it so much harder. Like there was nothing to grab onto. It was just a giant block of ice. Even the farmers carry, like they get you to do, they usually give you like jugs of water. They were literally just blocks of ice with handles screwing into the top of them.
What about the hoist? That would have been fun too, because the rope would have been stiff and frozen. And
yeah, it was. I feel like it was just heavier, but it was hard. Yeah, you were using a lot of momentum. You were basically pulling yourself up the rope to a standing position, and then falling over to lift it that kind of 1.5 meters, and then holding it there and standing back up again. I actually made a mistake on the first lap because the rope that I'd been practicing a lot of my rope climbing on back here was kind of one of those really thick, sturdy ropes, but all the ones that they use are those quite thin ones. And so the very first lap on the rope climb, I climbed up it, got to the top, and just kind of let go the amount that I'm used to letting go, just from kind of muscle memory, and forgot that it's just a way skinnier rope, and just basically started falling, and out of panic just clamped on and burnt both my hands to the point of blood on the about an hour into the race. And I mean, because you've got gloves, so you're basically taking your gloves off for anything that was grip related, shoving them in your pockets, doing their obstacle, and putting them back on. But by then I was kind of end of the first lap, I was bleeding into my gloves. I didn't really know what I was going to do. But luckily my partner that was with me at the time was a registered nurse, so every lap she would spend about 5 minutes bandaging my hands up and putting new kind of wraps back on them, and before sending me back out again.
Sending you back out.
Yeah.
So 95k. So you did about 8 laps, or did 8 laps?
Yeah, I did 8 laps. They I forgot to mention, but they do a 5k just running section at the start. So they send you off kind of down the road and into the local town and back, just to spread the field out a bit before you head into obstacles. So yeah, it was about an 11k loop, but with that 5k extra at the start to kind of get up to kind of 93, 95k.
Okay. And then from there, it looks like you've caught, well, most of the things you put on your email, looks like you've just concentrated on anything over 100 miles or up 100 miles.
Yeah.
Tarawera a couple of times.
So I ended up having to take quite a big break. I ended up doing nerve damage basically the entire way down my right leg from Iceland. So I didn't run until basically June the next year. And then, yeah, just decided that took a lot of money and commitment and everything to get to Iceland. So I spent kind of most of that year just focusing on running and finishing off my studies, I guess. And then, yeah, once I'd kind of got everything back on track and done all that, I just found a local race that it was kind of something that was always on my list to look at to do. And
so had you done any other Taraweras like the shorter ones before, or you just decided the 100 mile was a good place to start?
Yeah, just jumped straight into the biggest one. Hadn't done the others at all. I hadn't done an ultra that didn't involve an obstacle at that point.
Because I was going to say, because all the other ultras you've done have been Spartans and everything, so they're all around. Yeah. Oh, you've done 80 miles, which is how many in the world's toughest in 80 miles? How many obstacles would have been in that?
I did look it up before. It was, I think, 21 per lap.
Per lap. Yeah.
So I don't know if Liam went through this at all with the Tough Mudder stuff, but they count their total distance off how many laps you do. They don't actually measure the actual running distance. They just
well, we haven't actually gone through this side with Liam. We've done his coaching and all that. We're going to give him back next year and go through his OCR experience. We got him to talk about coaching and different things. Yeah, so we haven't had a big talk to him about it yet.
So roughly with World's Toughest Mudder, they tried standardize the loop as a 5 mile loop, and so if you did 10 laps, you just say it's 50 miles. They don't actually measure it as like to an exact. So everything goes up, and you either did 50 miles or you did 55. There's no kind of in between.
Yep.
And that's how they give people those milestone bronze and silver bibs and all that sort of thing. But the first year they had a few penalties for things, but they weren't very big. And the next year, the year that I did the 80 miles, they had a lot of penalty loops for things, so just additional running, but none of that adds to your final distance. So there was my watch ran out of battery, so I never actually measured the whole thing. But I had my Canadian friend that came 13th behind me. She had measured the whole thing, and we talked about it afterwards. And I think she failed a few more things than me, but her watch said she'd done 160k, which is closer to 100 miles. But she had only
miles, yeah.
But her official finishing time, distance was 80 because she'd done 16 laps.
Yep.
So yeah, all that extra, you've got to do it to get through the lap, but it doesn't actually technically count.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
So my theory with the Tarawera was that I must have run close to 100 miles already, but it had all this other stuff in the way, so it can't be that bad.
So how did you find it with no obstacles in the race?
I had a really bad build-up, and that I got sick for most of January, so my training was not very good. I actually got told by my doctor the week before that he advised me not to do it. But I thought I'd spend most of the year working up to it, that I'd just turn up and kind of take it maybe a bit easier if I felt like I was struggling. But it actually is really hard. It's completely different because you're not getting a break at any point to say use your arms or stop at an obstacle and stretch things out. You're just constantly trying to move as fast as not as fast as you can, but you just never want to stop. Like even when you're eating, you're still walking, and you just your legs just get to a point where they. Liam actually was my pacer for that race, so he met me at the 120k mark and did the last 45k with me. And yeah, he was just struggling to every few k was he'd kind of like lie me on the ground and stretch my legs out because I just I couldn't get up and down stairs because everything just seized up.
So
yeah, that first year doing that was pretty brutal. My goal I kind of had two goals. The first one was just to finish, and the next one was to see how close to 24 hours I could get. And I got, I think, 23:40, 40 something. So I just got up to
23:43 you've got.
Oh, yeah,
on your email.
Sounds about right.
Third male was pretty under 30, which is pretty good for your first go.
Yeah. There's not many under 30s that do it, which kind of helps. Most people aren't that crazy yet. It takes a bit of time. But yeah, so after I'd done that, I kind of always wanted to go back and actually dedicate a year to it to improve. So I trained all of last year and went back and took about 2.5 hours off the time. So that was pretty good. And just knowing the course and what to expect made it so much easier. You knew kind of roughly where the hills were and where the hard parts were, and where you should be saving your energy, and where the road sections were coming up where you can make back some time.
And you did Kepler also. Was that last year or the year before?
That was last year. So was it like first weekend of December last year?
Okay.
So that was awesome, but it was also a little disappointing because it was the third time in their history that they've the weather was too bad and they wouldn't let us do the full loop. So we kind of ran from the start of the Great Walk up to the Luxmore Hut, which is the first hut, which is kind of 13k into the course. You kind of just break through the tree line, get to what's supposed to be the real stunning views, but we couldn't see anything. And then you turn around and go back down, and then you run in the opposite direction around the course, basically to the other side of the hill, and then turn around and come back.
Okay. So
we missed all the back country bits, basically.
Spectacular part.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't see it anyway. It was the reason for it was the weather was too bad, and the helicopter wouldn't be able to get up if something happened to someone.
Because that's pretty hard to get into, isn't it? Like you've got to go.
Yeah, I think it's that year it sold out in 2 minutes. But you can put all your details in before the tickets go on sale, and you literally just open up the website and click confirm, and it's all done. But you do have to. The tickets went on sale at like 6 a.m. on a Saturday, so you had to set an alarm and wait by your computer and hit refresh a few times. So, but it is very hard to get into. But that was kind of the start of a big training week for me. So I took that whole week off, and I did the Kepler on the Saturday, and then the next day I started the Milford, just hiking it, and so did that over the next 4 days, and then did a few other just standard kind of Queenstown things, like ran up Roy's Peak and Ben Lomond, and then on the next day I ran across the Rootburn track and back. So that was 60 something K trail run for the day, and that was crazy because it was December when I did it, but it snowed overnight. And so when I ran across the track in the morning, I had a few docked rangers stop me and say I couldn't go any further for half an hour because it was an avalanche risk. And so I had to sit on the side of the track in the snow in December for half an hour and wait for the snow to melt, and then ran across to the other side and then came back a few hours later, and it was like I was in a completely different part. There was no snow to be seen, and it was all just sunny and blue sky and waterfalls and stuff everywhere. That was pretty crazy.
Yes. Anything else, Max, you can think of? I've come to the bottom of my email.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering a few things. Do you feel like you've moved on from the OCR events, or is COVID really just throwing a spanner in them? Like, you're going to get back into OCR, or you're focusing more on other forms of ultra running?
No, I definitely want to do it again. COVID has definitely ruined that a bit. I think I was always planning on having a break or so, like I did for a year. But yeah, I definitely want to get back into it. Me and Liam have talked quite a bit about going overseas and doing another trifecta weekend somewhere, or just doing something like that. I'm definitely not done with it. I've kind of been unlucky. Well, not unlucky, just the New Zealand ones have always been like Ultimate Athlete that was this year. I was supposed to go down and do that, but it was the same weekend as my mum's 60th birthday, so that was just things like that have meant that I haven't been able to get back out there, but I definitely want to.
What about the hardest event you've ever done? You mentioned Iceland. Is it Iceland's probably the hardest event?
Yeah, Iceland was the hardest. Not like there were elements of other races that have definitely been harder, but just everything put together, just the elements, the cold, the darkness, just the obstacles and the amount of extra thinking you had to do about having, trying to keep your little piece of card safe and trying to worry about the time to know if you had enough time left to do another lap without getting disqualified and things like that. They all just added to it. Yeah, Iceland was definitely the hardest.
Yeah, the mental side of ultra running always fascinates me as well, because I think myself, I said on the podcast a few times that I've probably never run that far and I'm more of a short distance runner, but I was thinking too, just asking about hardest events, do you think there is a part of you that is searching, you're always searching for something harder and for that challenge and trying to break yourself, basically? Is that part of what drives you, or is that something that's a bit off?
No, it is a little bit like that, because as hard as all of these races have been, I've always finished them. So there's never been a point where you've stopped and given up or kind of lost sight of whatever the goal was. So there's always a part that's kind of like, what's the next thing? I've kind of ticked that off. Where can I go next? But I don't know if you'd call it lucky or whether it was just how it worked. But the first World's Toughest that me and Liam did, I actually both of us got really injured in that race. But I ended up, I sprained my ankle about 10 hours into the race and spent the next 15 hours walking on it and collapsed at the finish line and got taken to hospital and got given crutches and all sorts of stuff. And so everything I've done after that has just been like, this is hard, but I've done worse. And so it's always just, as long as you can, from a mental side of things, if you can think of something that's, you've almost always been through something that's worse at some point. So you just go, oh, this isn't, like, I'm hurting, but it's not actually as bad as it probably feels.
And on that, you what is missing from my list here? You didn't send me. Didn't you go to Hawaii with Liam?
No, I missed out on that one.
Oh, because he put that as one of the hardest ones he's done. And
yeah, that was one of the ones we've talked about going back and doing, kind of when things open up again, because he went and did it and said it was just amazing. And Matt Ainsley's done it as well, and he kind of said the same thing. So that's on my list of.
We also had the Kim and Andrew that run the Alpha Challenge.
Oh yeah,
they've done Hawaii as well. They raved about it.
I mean, it's the perfect excuse for a holiday and a race at the same time, really. Like, I know when Liam went, Jess, his partner, just had a week on the beach drinking cocktails while Liam was running around in the mountains, and they both had a blast.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So you mentioned quite a few injuries. Do you think your body is holding up? Still good to go? Still got a lot more events than you?
Definitely still got events in me. I just have to be very careful about how I train. I can't really do as much mileage or as much repetition for certain things as I like. Like I've pretty much injured everything. I've had torn Achilles and knee problems and hip problems. I've done the nerves most of the way down my right leg. I've dislocated shoulders. I've done my left bicep. I've kind of done a bit of everything. So it's kind of not a part of me that I can just ignore. I have to kind of work on everything if I want to keep doing it. So that the rehab side of things takes a lot of the training time up just to be able to keep in one piece.
Wow, must love it. Keeps bringing back. And
yeah.
My last question actually is looking through some of the photos as well. I mean, you're quite muscular, strong arms, quite ripped. But doing lots of endurance, lots of high mileage, like, do you find that hard to maintain muscle and do all the mileage, or?
I don't don't really know how to answer, because it's not really like, it was always something you worked on both sides of it for the obstacle stuff. But I guess when I started doing the ultras, it was just kind of part of my training routine, and so I don't really focus on it. But I still, because of all the injuries, I can't do running or leg stuff every day. So I still probably have a day or two a week where I just go and keep my body ticking over and do some upper body stuff and kind of stretch everything out. So I haven't really focused on it, but it's just kind of maintained it, I guess. But I did. It's quite funny that you mentioned it, because when I did Tarawera this year, I ran most of it with a guy that I met down at Kepler, who we ended up running most of that race together as well. But we didn't know each other before then, and he told me he had a few people come up to him afterwards and ask him who the muscly runner was, and no one knew who I was, but heaps of people on course had picked out that I was basically the only one running in a singlet, and that was the only one that didn't look like a runner. And so heaps of people were asking who I was.
But, especially for the 100 miler, you know, the stereotypical runner, quite skinny, and someone who doesn't really look in shape. You see them run, it's like, whoa. But just running so far, you know, burns a lot of calories.
I've had a few people ask me things like that, like, you know, or even just my physios and stuff, just saying that I'm a completely different build to everyone else they coach and see who does anything the same as me. So I'm not sure if that's, I don't know enough about it to know if that's a benefit, or whether that's a kind of holds me back a bit, but it hasn't seemed to bother me so far.
So have you got any ambitions to run longer ultras? Go out there and do 200 kilometres, or?
200 kilometres would be kind of just a cool thing to tick off, because I don't feel like many people have done that. But I don't think really I would go further than 100. Like 200 is probably as far as I'd go. I definitely don't want to do 200 miles or anything like that. Like that just starts getting into a whole another level of crazy with someone. If you cross the finish line and someone tells you to turn around and go back and do it all again, I don't think I'd be able to do it.
What about something like one of those Big's Backyard 24-hour, or not 24 hours, just run until you can't run anymore?
Yeah. I've got a few things like that are kind of on my list, depending on how my body holds up and how everything else looks. I've always wanted to do coast to coast, always wanted to do an Ironman. Me and Liam have talked a few times about God Zone and about the backyard thing. So there's definitely things on the list that I want to try to tick off at some point. And then there's heaps of races overseas that you kind of put your name down for and hope that you get pulled out of the ballot to, like there's the Golden State 100 miler, and then there's the UTMB in France and things like that.
Yeah,
that would all be kind of bucket list events.
Well, you must have got, so you would have got an entry into UTMB because your placings in Tarawera this year, wouldn't you?
I've got an entry to the ballot.
Oh, to the ballot. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll apply for that at the end of the year and see what happens. But I mean, it's so hard to get into. But I've got the entry lasts for 2 years, so I can apply this year. And if I don't get in, then the way their ballot works is that every year that you don't get in, you get an extra ticket. So okay. if I apply this year, don't get in, next year I can apply twice. So that's the goal. I've got 2 years to try and get in, but it's all just luck from here.
All right, I don't have anything else, Max. Anything we haven't covered?
No, I think we covered a lot, and heard about a bunch of different events and some crazy stories about some world class events, and
it's definitely been a pretty cool excuse to kind of travel the world and see a whole bunch of places I never thought I would. So it's done more than just get me hooked on fitness. Basically been my excuse for traveling for the last 5 years. It's been where's a crazy race and how can I build a holiday around it?
So a couple of questions we've asked everyone is, first of all, is there a question we haven't asked you that you want to throw out there? Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't brought up? Or
I feel like we've definitely covered off most of my stuff, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head event-wise that I haven't covered off.
All right, and then we'll throw you a real curveball. If you have a coffee, you can have a coffee with anyone you like, anyone in the world. Who would you like to have a coffee with, and why?
Ooh. Nothing to do with sport at all, but
No,
I'd probably go David Attenborough.
Okay.
Because I can't think of anyone who's probably seen more in the world really than him. He would have a story about basically every living thing in every place. He's been everywhere.
Oh, that's interesting. It certainly is. We've had Liam had who's the coach, the running coach, Arthur Lydiard.
Oh yeah, so, yeah. He would, of course, he would. He'd want to get as much knowledge as possible.
Can't think who Matt picked. I can't remember who Matt said he wanted to have a coffee with.
Yeah, who did Matt? We just did it, didn't we? We just recorded it. He was asking for 2 people for next time. I can't remember who he said.